Good afternoon. This is Balam, Revista Balam. First of all, I want to thank to the staff, to Amy, to the incredible team that is allowing us to be over here to talk about the latest issue. And yeah, my name is Luis. I'm going to first talk about what's the project before getting into issue 11, Radical. So Balam is an independent queer photography magazine, which it started in 2015, being a digital project, and then it made its leap to paper in 2018. So the idea of Balam basically was born with a necessity to find a containment space for the queer community, and especially the photography. And it's a photo book magazine in which we expose different themes, talking about the infinite realities of the dissidents and marginalized communities. So we do an open call, we receive material, and also we invite a guest editor in each issue to talk about what's the social or political situation that is happening around our context. And it's a project, it's a political project, and we speak and we talk from an anti-hegemonic stance. So these are until this day we have published 11 issues, in which we have the honor to have over here Lucas and Cole, Lucas Ondak, I said it, yes? Yeah, cool, yeah. Okay. Lucas Ondak and Cole Rizki, which they are contributors of this issue. So basically, Radical, it's an issue that is born with the idea of dedicating a complete archive on the queer community. And this idea of Radical basically is thought more on the idea of first-person archives, which I find this like a big movement nowadays, and I think it's a fascinating movement in some kind of way, because it's interesting to see how these archives are born outside from the institutions, and it's also, these archives are also thought from the idea, from the necessity of getting encountered. These archives are born from communities, to them to have a space where they can, sorry for my English, I need to put the words, yeah, until date, the guest editor of this issue is Maria Belén Correa, which is one of the fewest trans activists in Argentina, and she is the founder and director of Archivo de la Memoria Trans Argentina, which is one of the biggest archives of the transvestite community in Latin America. So I thought about Maria Belén as the person in some kind of way to guest edited this issue, because I think that the impact that the Archivo de la Memoria Trans has come along the way, along these years, has given an awakening for other queer archives to start doing their own archive. You know, so it's interesting also because these archives were born more from the idea to see who were the colleagues that were alive, or who were the ones that are migrated or were like in exile, basically. And we work mostly with Latin American archives, but also we work with other archives from the South perspective, like Queer Indonesia Archive and Beirut Archive from Muhammad Abduni. And also, I would like to give it to Lucas the
floor.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucas Ondak. I am a transsexual curator and writer, and for this issue of Balam, I wrote about an archive of trans women, sex workers who call themselves las transformistas in Caracas, Venezuela, and an archive that sort of preserves the pre-production photography. The pre-production photography that was made in the process of creating a 1980s documentary called Trans, which followed these women, their everyday lives, their daily routines, as well as the work that they did on the Avenida Libertador in Caracas. And so I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about like the process of writing this text and also my relationship to this archive. So the text is called A Light Coming from Elsewhere, The Immortal Lives of Las Transformistas. And I kind of struggled in writing this text because my previous work with this archive was curatorial. And I kind of helped develop with my co-curators an exhibition that presented Trans, the documentary itself, for the first time in the United States, as well as the pre-production photography for the very first time ever. And so, you know, this was kind of like a big undertaking, and we wanted to make sure that we did it in a way that was holistic and, you know, really encompassed the archive and the film, and also gave, you know, kind of justice to these women whose stories had been you know, hidden for so long. And as a curator, I was kind of very hesitant to infuse my own personal life into these texts and into the curatorial work, in part because, you know, I'm not Latin American, I'm not a trans woman, I'm also not a sex worker. So there are a lot of things that, like, we actually, like, I didn't have in common with these women, aside from simply being trans. So I didn't really want to kind of map on my own personal feelings too much. But you know, I think that in the process of writing this text, I was able to kind of flesh out why I feel like these women mean so much to me, and that being that through this archive, it kind of transmits their lives and their stories in a way that is a reminder that trans people have always been here, and we've always existed and lived and survived despite the many political, social, and cultural obstacles that are produced to hinder our existence and our survival. And I think that was really special. You know, I helped produce a public program alongside the exhibition that one of the women who came to speak in it, she was a sex worker, trans woman, she was like looking at these women and she's like, those are my friends, you know, like I know those girls. And I think that to me was just spoke so much about how important this is. And you know, I think I also wanted to carry on a queer lineage of talking about this archive. I was in a class at CCS Bard, which is a graduate program that kind of focused on this archive, and the professor, Mariano Lopez Ioane, introduced us to a text by Marcia Ochoa, who is a writer and archivist and thinker at, I believe it's Columbia University, or I think it's NYU, actually. Sorry about that. But she had gone back in the 1990s and done a sort of ethnographic, deeply compassionate portrait of the generation of Las Transformistas who existed after the documentary Trans. And so I really saw the text that I was producing in this edition as being in conversation with that and being an extension of the work of another queer, I don't want to say elder, but like someone who I was following in the footsteps of. And I also kind of wanted to think about the ways in which Manuel Herreros de Lemos, who was one of the documentarians, thought about the preservation and the continued relevance of this archive. So essentially, back in the day, Manuel and Mateo, who has since passed, they were just two guys, 23-year-olds, who were living in Caracas and looked around at the time and were like, wow, you know, this society treats these people like they're not people, and we need to do something about that. So just the two of them, with almost no money, broke in, they broke into this photography store where one of them was working, took cameras out, would go out every night until the morning for an entire year with these women, or well, from September through June, so kind of half a year, but they would go out with these women from night until morning, and then before the photography store opened, they would put the equipment back. And that kind of just commitment to this community of people, that integration into them, that kind of like, they're not just hopping in and extracting a story and trying to proliferate it as far as possible. They're really getting to know the women and their lives in a complete way, because they cared about them. And after they debuted the film Trans, they had a very difficult time in getting it distributed anywhere and being able to show it again. It was only showed, I believe, 2 more times after its debut, and then it went into an archive, you know. And that archive was Manuel Herreros de Lemos's personal archive. If he had not taken the initiative to preserve not only the film, but also all of these pre-production photographs as well, it would have been lost to time. And we would not know about these women's stories. And I mean, we already know so little, because so many of these women have since, you know, since the making of the film, died of multiple different reasons. But their voices only exist through these photos and through the documentary and through what Manuel remembers. And I think that Manuel's commitment not only to making the film, but also to preserving the archive, speaks to the necessity of understanding that even though something might seem undervalued or seem not important at the time, or you have a society that says, like, we don't care about these stories, it's worth it to keep telling them and to keep them safe for generations to come. Because now, you know, I'm like a 20-year-old trans person, and I get to see these, and I get to tell news stories about it in Balam. So that's what this text is kind of about in the context that it's coming from.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you want to go? Yeah.
Let's see. Easier to talk into the microphone. Can you all hear me? Okay? Yeah. Okay. So that's great, because we have a 20-year-old transsexual curator and a 40-year-old academic, trans academic. So we are having an intergenerational dialogue on trans curating and archival work, and queer Luis, of course, who's an honorary member and a real member of the Trans Memory Archive as well, and someone who's done an incredible amount of work curating and otherwise with Balam. I was going to kind of, as an academic, I often read. Would you be okay with that? Would that be interesting to you? Can I read you a little bit of my the article that I contributed to the issue, so you can get a better sense of some of the archival materials? Is this okay? Okay, cool. So, as a scholar of visual culture and performance studies, and as someone with a deep love of queer and trans photography, I've long been struck by the curatorial and editorial work that Luis is doing with Balam and with other projects like Migra Migra, the monthly art book and print fair he organized in Buenos Aires for many years. And as Luis shared, Balam is the first limited edition and annually recurring themed find art book in Latin America dedicated to queer photography. When Luis calls it a revista, the English translation magazine does not do justice to the way that each issue is so beautifully bound and printed as an art object in its own right. And you can see it up here. Balam is a gift. It's meant to be held. You have to sit with its weight, turn its glossy pages, feel the waxy exposed binding in your hands. There's something decadent about it, in the best possible way. This art book insists on the weightiness of our histories and on our presence, and at the same time, it curates our pasts yet to come. My work with Luis and with Balam emerges through my own scholarly work with trans photographic archives, and more specifically with Argentina's Trans Memory Archive, which I first encountered in 2017 on opening night of the archive's first large-scale public exhibition. That 2017 exhibit entitled Esta se fue, esta la mataron, esta murió, or This One Left, This One Was Killed, This One Died, was installed in a former concentration camp, operational during Argentina's last military, ecclesiastic, civilian dictatorship, when 30,000 people were killed for their political affiliations and activism. Like the radical or radical issue of Balam, which we're discussing, the exhibit highlighted the materiality of archival images as objects and offered resistant modes of viewing grounded in speculative historical analysis. And in all cases, whether Balam or this archival installation, trans touch emerged as a as a form of curatorial political resistance. In an earlier piece of mine titled Familiar Grammars of Loss and Belonging, published in Journal of Visual Culture in 2020, I argued that the Trans Memory Archive's curatorial decisions stage a vital relationship between trans and non-trans death. Through careful placements of portraits, family albums, and other vernacular photographs, the archive catalyzed a shared political and visual language of kinship and resistance. Central to this staging was what I theorized as trans touch, a mode of archival touch or curatorial touch of curating, arranging, and touching images that resist state violence by forging new connections across political struggles, bodies, and temporalities. Each time we touch a photograph, whether in the archive or in gallery spaces or in the pages of Balam, we constellate forms of kinship, fashioning embodied networks of trans relation through acts of curation, where trans touch operates as a form of arrangement with care, drawing us into relation once more. As I wrote then, trans kinship is both, quote, fashioned and arranged with care, curated through tact, cohering in gallery spaces and living rooms alike through multisensorial encounters where bodies touch bodies, fingers touch prints, and photographs touch back. Through archival, curatorial, and editorial work, we forge resistant visual and material cultures, cultivating relationships and modes of collectivity to combat the fascist and increasingly authoritarian times we're in. Luis's work with Balam offers up a powerful mode of queer and trans curatorial practice that is anti-fascist at its best. Luis first invited me to collaborate on the 2023 issue of Balam New Masculinities, where I contributed an introductory essay on photographic practice, and I reflected on trans photography as relational practice. And that's always been personal. It was central to my own transition process in the early 2000s. Writing for Balam gave me a chance to weave together these personal histories with critical reflection and situate photography as a medium of relation, kinship, and survival. In this more recent contribution, do you have any of the images, Luis? ¿Tenés las imágenes?
Yeah.
De las fotos, de las postales?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So in my more recent contribution, Greetings From, I turned to a set of archival photographs from Archivo Arque, or the Arque Archive, founded in Bogotá's San Felipe neighborhood in 2016 by art critic and curator Alim Badawi and executive director Pedro Felipe Enestrosa. Archivo Arque is a sweeping project dedicated to preserving Colombian art and queer cultural production more broadly. In recent years, the archive relocated to Madrid's Lavapiés neighborhood, where it now holds 100,000 pieces in its underground archival holding space and above-ground gallery. Like the Archivo de la Memoria Trans, or Juan Cairos's Archivos Desviados and co-curated installation Afuera, Publishing Queer Liberation, which is on display here at PS1, Arque is not a passive repository. It's an activist project. Badawi and Enestrosa activate the archive through exhibitions, publications, and collaborations, enlivening its materials, as Luis does with Balam. In other words, the materials are meant to be seen. And this is true, too, of the real photograph postcard images I wrote about in my contribution to Balam, which I'm happy to share with you here if you would like. Can you read it? Yeah? Okay. These are some of the images.
They're mixed, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So this is the piece I wrote. It's very short, 2 pages. It's titled Greetings From. We all know that cocky grin, those smiling eyes, that rakish hat and thick cigar, that fin de siglo transmasculinity hanging off your lower lip like a compliment that lands, sending a Victorian or perhaps Edwardian era blush curling over the recipient's face. It's the pleasure of donning or maybe unbuttoning a crisp dress shirt that hits just right at the wrist. It's a sharp crease that snaps clean and tight. It's hands pressed into fine pockets, your jacket and chest open wide with shoulders back, chin raised, and legs planted firmly with ease. It's that showy watch chain shimmering with each polished strut, that full boutonniere peeking the nose of all those in range. These are the trappings of high-gloss transmasculinity on display in this image selection made and held by archival. Largely shot between the 1900s and 1920s across France, Britain, and Spain, these images transport us to the age of the music hall, the dandy, the male impersonator, the breeches role. We find you up on stage, commanding and stoic, the opening act pinned up against curtains, or perhaps pinned up by our own desires to see you and to claim you, to name you as one of our own. Exuding steady and sly confidence, you continue to meet our gaze in the present, staring back across the century between us. Yet these images, like you, were never fixed. They traveled quite widely, crossing oceans and continents as they made their way around the globe. Because these were not portraits primarily destined to be hung on living room walls or framed on bedside tables. Instead, the images, which we will be viewing shortly, are examples of early 20th century real photograph postcards, a form of vernacular photography that saw its heyday from the 1880s through the end of the First World War, and with the advent of the postcard itself. These images, your portrait, were meant to be held. They were printed on postcard paper to be sent and received. The stamps and seals pressed on the upper left-hand corner in two of these images mark their, as you can see here, mark their postal circulation and their dual photographic and epistolary forms. At the dawn of the 20th century, before the widespread use of radio and the telephone for communication, the postcard was new media. Real photo postcards were widely manufactured by big businesses that bought up batches of negatives taken by local or traveling photographers, commercial portrait photographers, and even amateurs. Many of these postcards that you see here in Balam were commercially produced and sold, like the portraits of famous music hall and vaudeville performers, such as British performer Vesta Tilley, who you saw earlier, and now in this image, French stage actress Sarah Bernhardt. Both worked transmasculinity for a paying audience, and the circulation of their images on these real photograph postcards was likewise a form of advertisement that magnified their celebrity. Where stamps are missing in some cases, sometimes real photo postcards were purchased but never posted at all. Sitting in a local and non-commercial photographer's studio for the postcard photograph might have been event enough, and one that didn't require a stamp. Two photographs reproduced here depicting groups of friends were privately commissioned, meaning that any printed images were likely meant to circulate between them and probably without a stamp. In other cases, as with the commercial photos of Tilley and Bernhardt, such image objects might have been coveted as part of collectible sets or perhaps bought as a memento to be enjoyed by the purchaser alone. Though perhaps it's worth mentioning that the earlier alluring postcard of a pensive Vesta Tilley, who you saw with head in hand, was sent on December 24th, 1905, a handsome Christmas present indeed. This era likewise saw the widespread democratization of photography, with the arrival of cameras like the $1 USD Kodak Brownie or the 3A folding pocket Kodak from 1903, which produced postcard-sized negatives easily printed onto postcard backing. Middle and even working class families could create postcard-ready images. This would have been particularly important for some of our dashing transmasculine dandies who may have wished in some cases to keep a lower profile. At the same time, as the postcard of two black performers, Gregory and Jack Brown, dancing the cakewalk in Paris, France in 1903 suggests, this set of real photo postcards of gender-bending, racialized dandies also has a shadow archive. Another set of images was circulating en masse and side by side during the same time period, the hundreds of thousands of colonial photographs being shot by French, German, Spanish photography studios located in the colonies and sent back to the metropole by European tourists and photographers alike as a lesson for their compatriots in racialized and gendered difference. The production and circulation of colonial imagery of black and brown subjects, peppered with Orientalist iconography, was meant to discipline and reproduce modes of white and upper-class femininity and masculinity at home in the metropole, while reinforcing tropes of exploration and discovery, of white masculine desire and conquest. These photographs of transmasculine dandies also form part of that imperial archive. So while these real photo archives might archive multiple scenes of desire, they also archive a set of relations between photographer and sitter, between writer and reader, between sender and receiver, and between you and the image. These postcards passed through workers' hands in the early 1900s. They got sorted, delivered, tucked into family albums, or carried in back pockets. They were lost and found and lost again in desk drawers and moving boxes, ending up in flea markets, local history museums, public libraries, and personal archives. Real photograph postcards have been with us and on display for over a century, but rarely have they been considered objects of fine art or worthy of sustained attention. With their archival reproduction here in Balam, we have the joy of finding them and re-encountering you anew. And I'll stop there and we can keep talking, and I have other things to say, but I want to pass the mic. So that was my contribution to Balam. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lucas and Cole, for your thoughts on this incredible approach. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting also to understand the impact of these archives that has today in the memory, you know, because these archives in some kind of way they have a time bomb, you know, because the people that are behind those archives are people that they aren't present in time, basically, you know, and they are pushed out of the time, you know. So it's really important the raising the awareness of this implication, because these are marginalized archives, and sometimes these archives also needs to be put on a side where not everything has to be published or discovered in some kind of way, which I find it important for these archives to have this permanence of occultismo. I don't know how you say occultismo. Hidden, I would like to know if you have any questions also, if you have any thoughts on the reflections. Yeah.
I would love to hear more, Luis, about your own process as a curator with Balam. If you can tell us a little bit more about how you've gone about cultivating these relationships, which are all often decades-long collaborations that you've had with people. How are you making decisions? What are you thinking about as you're curating these issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Balam, I mean, I don't come from an academic background, and Balam was born back when I was saying from the necessity of having like a containment space, me being as a queer migrant guy in Argentina. I'm originally from Honduras, but I think that it's really important also to deconstruct the idea of what is to build a magazine, you know, because I use the term magazine to really talk about how do we work collectively. And Balam, basically what we do is like we try to crystallize the time and the context of what is happening in our society and community, and especially the queer community, because also there's Argentina and Latin America as its whole, where it's really difficult to have sustainability in every sense to have this project afloat. So it's interesting how that process of the migration has given me the tools of this awareness, and also it's all based from this self-thought, because it's also because each issue of Balam is different, and it's different in total sense, you know, because magazines are like more linear projects that have like this same system identity, you know, they have like the same how the content is distributed. But in this case, Balam, there's nothing linear about it because we are not straight. The people that are behind that, we are not linear. And I'd like to understand that. How can I translate that symbolically to the aura of the project? So in each issue, we always change from its narration, from its addition, from its materiality. So the only common thing that Balam has is its size, and it's a really thick book. It's a weapon. It's a weapon, so it's like, yeah, but I mean also it's a homage, you know, because also what we try to do, or what I am thinking is how can we work with decentralization, especially knowing that I'm in a centralized place, you know, being Buenos Aires in Argentina, and well, now over here in New York, you know, so it's also to question that, you know, to habilitate. Because I think that for me, the idea of curation is more like an excuse to really talk about my community, you know, or that's how I use photography, basically, which is like my main interest in the project. And then also, I think it's really interesting, this issue, because it's built from trust. Also, I think that's something really hard to find in institutions, because, for example, working from Nan Golden and Archivo de la Memoria Trans, we built this incredible dialogue in which we took this to two different archives, and we put Nan Golden in a new view and from a Latin American perspective. But the idea is that the trust and the applicants that she had to allow to understand, okay, where this project comes from. And I think also that but my vision, or what I tend to do in Balam and with the collaborators, is to talk always in first person. You know, we're so used to systematically and socially, we're used that our stories are being talked and thought by external people, you know. So I think that over here it's an excuse and it's a tool to put these stories in first person and to maintain that also, you know, and also from a non-academic way. For me, it's like really important to not be only in the idea of academic. I mean, I'm starting right now for the first time doing an MA, so it's like a big challenge. But for me, my school is Argentina Transmemory Archive, because that's when I learned about this idea that not everything has to be theorized, and also what I question about is that the bodies, the real bodies, like, are the ones that are like in the academia. Sometimes there's a lot of way that they have theorized a lot of us, you know, but I think sometimes in their epistemology, for some academics, they lack the streets in their epistemology, in their theory, you know, and it's something that is not easy to have, you know. So in some kind of way, Balam has, I don't know, it's like it's an experiment. It's a way also to enjoy ourselves and to do a homage, a thank you to the people that are behind that, because it's really hard to produce and to sustain the project. But also it's interesting how the themes are born, because I try to think like a chain, like symbolically like a chain, in which in the creative process each issue awakes what is going to be the next issue, you know. And I found that beautiful when that happened, you know, because we are talking about the infinity realities, you know. It's not that Balam is going to talk, I don't know, about water, or about, you know, like this global magazines that they talk about the world. And in this case, it's like it's completely the opposite, but yeah, I think that what Balam has habilitated it has habilitated a voice of representation, especially. That's why I think I try to tell why my projects are like based, and they are based from the lack of something. So that's how I operate, you know, in some kind of way. Like that's like my motor, and yeah. Okay. Do you have any questions, someone? Yeah, sure.
I'm curious to know about your relationship with archives, and like, how do you see archives? Do they reproduce the same structures of oppression, or they're necessary? I'm talking about like the formalized community archives for LGBT or Q archives?
Yeah, I
Luis,
mean,
before you answer, we'll repeat the question in case
Yeah.
folks had trouble hearing that. The question was about what is, Luis, your relationship with the archives and also the formal structure of the archives in terms of LGBTQ archives that are formalized. Can you speak more to that relationship and process?
yeah, my approach was thanks, I also coordinate the editorial of Archival La Memoria Trans, which we are in booth K5, and thankfully we got the Shannon Michael Cain Award to be present for the first time, so it would be beautiful if you can go check it out, Archivo, and then Balam K7. But my experience was thankfully when the Cecilia Stalles, which is one of the members of the Argentina, was the one that invited me to be over there. But I really didn't have that much experience of what is having an archive, and how do I relate myself with an archive. I think it has. For me, like archives, I'm more interested in the impact of how take care of my colleagues, basically, more than the idea, and how can we organize also their visions, their stories, and how can we put it out. And also, I think that it's interesting because nowadays we are the ones that are taking the control of how to build an archive. And there's no single way of doing an archive also. So it's interesting because sometimes you have to follow different paths. But in my case, or what I think is that it's interesting because now before that, institutions were the ones that we were learning from institutions. And with this awareness of these archives that are in first person, now we are the ones that are learning institutions on how they can see us and read us. So I don't know if I responded to your question. Yeah, okay.
I saw another question in back. Yeah.
A very basic one. I'm curious about the name Balam. Where did it come from? What does it mean?
Yes.
How it sounds.
Where
Yeah,
does the name Balam come from is the question. Yeah.
Yeah, Balam means jaguar in the Mayan language, and it's a homage to the Mayan community. I'm from Honduras, and that's where Balam comes from, basically, and also because it sounds good. Yeah. Any questions? Well, thank you very much. I don't know if
We can keep chatting.
I mean,
too.
we have 15 more minutes. I don't know if we would like to talk about what do you thought about the magazine? What do you thought about the process of how? Yeah, why did you? What are your thoughts of radical?
Go ahead, Lucas.
Yeah. Well, for me, kind of speaking to the question that you had asked earlier about queer archives is the idea of having access to them. And so often archives about our communities, that represent our communities, are held by institutions and are not, while they might be open to a public to see, they're not distributed widely. You have to go and see them. You might have to make an appointment. They might not always be on view, etc. There are kind of obstacles in place. And what I think is so beautiful about Balam specifically and publications generally is the way in which they open up doors for people everywhere to be able to see archives. And I think that's what's so special about this edition, specifically Radical, because it presents so many different archives from many international contexts in one place, and is something that anyone anywhere can have access to, and I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm curious to hear, Luis, if you have future projects that might be on your horizon. Luis has just started his graduate program at Bard in curatorial practice, the MA program, so congratulations, Luis. I'm so happy for you. Yay.
Thank you very much.
Do you have visions, thoughts, things that you're thinking about moving forward as you're transitioning in this part of your life, professionally, personally, to
wow,
being
it's
here?
a lot. It's a lot to
Yeah.
answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, thank you
As
for
a
your words
incoming
and
curator, yeah.
for
Yeah.
for supporting. And yeah, I mean, the idea of Balam is to continue printing its next issue, which we already have the theme, and I don't want to say it because I like to keep the secret like in this mystery way, in some kind of way. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't like my thoughts are all around, so it's a really interesting experience to position myself over here in the US and to talk all in English. It's a lot of work. Talking all the time in English is Dios mío. But besides that, yeah, it's interesting to see how I will develop myself and how, I mean, my intention is how can I bring my community, especially Latin American community, to other spaces and to have access to that, you know, and also, yeah, like, yeah, I think like this new program on BARD, I think it will like, I mean, I will learn a lot about that. You know, about this whole idea of being a curator. I don't like the word curation. Curator is kind of, yeah. But besides that, I mean, I see myself as an intermediator. Most like I tried like to define myself like in that position better, you know. And I think, yeah, I mean, in some kind of way, I think like, I mean, I'm a young queer kid, but. In some kind of way, I think I have a responsibility for my community and for the past, basically, and to maintain the memory alive, you know, because we are living in this horrible times in which our stories are and our lives are always like in danger. So like for me, it's like a commitment in some kind of way, which I feel safe and in which I like put a lot of passion into that. And how can I translate that into the art world? Or to understand more the idea of how can we really work socially, and yeah.
Yeah, great. Are there any other questions that anyone has about Balam, about these folks, multiple people's curatorial practices or projects on the horizon? Anything you all would like to close with?
Yeah.
No? Oh, I see a question, a hand, yes. Yeah, the question is about some of the folks that we saw, I think, in relation to the the film, the Manuel Lemas film, and whether there are ways that we can find to follow these people's stories, whether it's through other archives, whether it's police archives, other community-based archives, or other forms of study and collaboration. And the film is from the 1980s, we should say. So it's
I mean, I think
yeah.
the film is where can you watch the film?
So if you live in New York City, the archive, the Manuel Herreros de Lemos and Mateo Menuaria archive is in ISLA, the Institute for Studies in Latin American Art. I believe you can make an appointment there and view it. That's if you live in New York City. If you don't live in New York City, Manuel Herreros de Lemos is someone who does respond to emails and to WhatsApp. So I don't know exactly how one can get in touch with him, but if you find his email, he's out there. And I think in regards to kind of the police records and wider documentation of these people, that's always something that's, I think, present within queer archives. I think what Balam does in this edition is provide like the jumping off point for further studies, because once you can kind of look through it and see this archive is from here, this person's name is attached to it, or this person wrote about it, or so-and-so, that's like a trail of breadcrumbs, and then you can reach out to them, and they can say, oh, yeah, I looked here, or, oh, this was the museum that held this archive, or this is the person you should talk to. It's kind of a door that opens up a possibility for a wider web of connections to grow. It's just the motivation to do that.
I think that also there's a way in that we're thinking about the archive as something that's printed, which in this case makes sense because we're talking about an art book, we're talking about Revista Balam. But a lot of these women's stories, the people that you're mentioning, are carried down through oral histories in their communities. So there's a lot of way in which those legends and histories are alive and well. They're just legendary, and you have to be part of the communities who share those stories, and who would be carrying that lineage forward in those ways. Especially with older trans and travesti folks and transformista folks who faced such high degrees of police violence and the HIV/AIDS epidemic as well. There's so few elderly trans women and transformistas and travestis who are alive today, but they certainly are there and are doing all sorts of oral history work, especially within the Trans Memory Archive itself, for example, which is not in Venezuela, it's in Argentina, but just as one example of the types of archival work that is about oral history rather than a documentary form. Another way that you can think about approaching these types of histories is through sensationalist press archives, so not just the police archive or the medical archive, but thinking about the tabloid presses that were very active during this time. Many of them had police sections where you'd see the sorts of detentions, and I know that the Trans Memory Archive is using material like that in trials, like trying to find material proving detention during particular time periods for trials for crimes against humanity. So there are a lot of ways to trace, I think, these stories. It just depends, what the intention, what you need, what your intention is in tracing them, right? But lots of ephemera and oral history as well, I think, gets at this. So,
I'll also just shout out, in relation specifically to the transformistas, Marcia Ochoa's Queen for a Day, that book is a very rich text that provided so much information that helped shape not only like the exhibition that presented trans and this pre-production photography, but also shaped my own thinking about these women and their lives and their stories. So that's a great starting place as well.
And to close, I want to say, sorry.
I have another question. Yeah.
If we want to continue seeing the work or projects that you where can we find it online or?
You can find us online at Revista Balam is our Instagram, and the web is revistabalam.com. So we publish the open calls, the different issues, news, basically, and we're today until Sunday, and the books, you can find them in printed matter, and I need to start distributing them, so I don't have that information more clearly, but yeah. And to close, I want to say that these archives are an evidence for future historical reparations. And that's the key point, and that's the focus of doing this, basically, So I think that these archives, these people that I already said, they are not in time because they have a time bomb by different situations for their health or for they got the trans woman got industrial silicon, So my point is that we need to accompany them and give them more space of visibility. So I invite you to look at the magazine if you are more interested in any particular project or you want to get in contact with some project. I could help you contact with them. And thank you very much for the talk. Thank you, Amy and the team, and thank you for listening to us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Was I nervous? Oh my God.
You did so good. No, you were great. You were great. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to do this.
Do you think we could get a picture?
Oh yeah, we need a picture. That's right.
Amy, could you take us a
somebody's got to take